Federal agents have uncovered what authorities are calling the most disturbing infiltration of state government by organized crime this generation has seen.
At 11:47 a.m., on a cold Tuesday morning, FBI Special Agent Harrison Webb stood before a packed federal briefing room in downtown Minneapolis and delivered a statement that would shake the upper Midwest to its core. Over the past 14 months, federal investigators have dismantled what we believe to be the largest child trafficking and organ harvesting operation ever discovered on American soil. 67 children, 17 daycare facilities, 4 states, and at the center of it all, a Minnesota State Human Services official named Vincent Khalil Osman, a man who had spent 9 years building a network so sophisticated, so carefully disguised, that it had operated in plain sight across the heartland of America. This is not a story about negligence. This is a story about engineered exploitation, political collusion, and a transnational human trafficking cartel that turned Minnesota's childcare system into a pipeline for something far darker than anyone imagined. And if you think you know how deep corruption can go, you're about to see how wrong you are. The operation began at 4:18 a.m. on March 9th in the Powderhorn Park neighborhood of South Minneapolis. The streets were empty, still wrapped in the freezing pre-dawn darkness that comes with late winter in Minnesota. Frost clung to windshields. Street lights cast long yellow shadows across silent residential blocks. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. FBI tactical units, ICE enforcement teams, Minneapolis SWAT, and Hennepin County Sheriff's deputies converged on a 2-story brick building with faded yellow siding and a hand-painted sign that read, Bright Futures Child Development Center. Flashbangs ignited in the cold air. Doors exploded inward. Agents in black tactical gear flooded through every entrance, their voices cutting through the chaos with sharp, controlled commands. Inside, they found 12 children sleeping on thin mattresses in a windowless basement room. No toys, no books, no signs of play. Just a surveillance camera in the corner, a steel-reinforced door with an electronic keypad lock, and a medical-grade refrigeration unit humming quietly against the back wall. When agents opened that refrigerator, they found vials of blood labeled with barcodes, tissue samples stored in transport containers, and a laminated chart listing blood types, organ compatibility markers, and contact information for offshore medical brokers. This was not a daycare. This was a processing site. Within the next 40 minutes, federal teams hit 16 more locations across Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, and Rochester. Underground daycare facilities operating without licenses, homes registered as foster placements that had never been inspected, warehouse spaces disguised as after-school programs. At each site, agents found the same pattern. Children separated from their families under the guise of state protective services or subsidized childcare programs. Medical equipment that had no place in a daycare environment. Records linking the children to encrypted health assessments and international wire transfers. By sunrise, federal agents had seized over $4.3 million in cash, 42 encrypted laptops, 17 server racks, hundreds of medical files, and recovered 67 children who had been systematically cataloged, medically evaluated, and prepared for something that no child should ever face. And buried deep inside one of those encrypted servers was a name that would unravel everything. Vincent Khalil Osman, Minnesota Department of Human Services, Senior Coordinator for Refugee and Immigrant Child Welfare Programs. A man with direct access to placement records, background check databases, and the authority to approve or deny investigations into daycare facilities across the state. A man who had turned his position into a command post for a transnational trafficking cartel that stretched from the streets of Minneapolis to the black market organ trade hubs of Tijuana, Jerez, and beyond. At 9:32 a.m., inside the FBI's cyber forensics lab in the federal building on South 4th Street, analysts cracked the final layer of encryption on Osman's hard drive. What they saw on the screen was a digital map that looked more like a military logistics network than a state childcare program. It had a code name: Operation Harvest Moon. The network diagram sprawled across multiple monitors, showing a web of shell corporations, fake nonprofit foundations, sham daycare licensing agencies, and offshore financial accounts that moved money through Turkey, Dubai, Mexico, and the Cayman Islands. At the top of the pyramid sat Osman, his encrypted authorization key linked to every major decision in the operation. Beneath him were recruiters embedded in refugee resettlement programs, corrupt caseworkers who falsified placement records, medical coordinators who conducted covert health screenings on vulnerable children, and transportation operatives who moved kids across state lines under the cover of legal. Foster care transfers. But the most chilling part was the downstream flow. The network didn't just traffic children for labor or exploitation, it trafficked them for their biological value. Investigators found contracts with underground medical brokers in Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez, pricing documents for organ procurement, and communication logs discussing blood type matches, tissue compatibility, and delivery timelines for high-priority clients in East Asia, the Middle East, and South America. Children as young as 4 years old had been medically assessed, cataloged, and assigned market valuations based on their organs. This was not corruption. This was command-level collusion with a transnational cartel that treated human beings as raw materials. And the network had been operating for at least 7 years. One senior FBI investigator, a 23-year veteran named Agent Carla Rhimes, stared at the screen and said what everyone in the room was thinking. This isn't just a trafficking ring, this is a supply chain. At 5:47 a.m. the following day, inside a joint federal command center at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, a digital map of the upper Midwest glowed on a massive screen. Red markers pulsed across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and South Dakota. 34 locations, all connected to Osman's network. All operational. Standing in front of that map was Deputy Director Samuel Navarro of ICE, flanked by FBI regional commanders, DIA liaisons, and Homeland Security Investigations unit chiefs. This morning, Navarro said, his voice calm but heavy with purpose, "We are launching the largest coordinated child recovery and trafficking eradication operation in the history of the Upper Midwest. Over 900 federal agents, 62 SWAT teams, air support from U.S. Customs and Border Protection helicopters, ground units from the U.S. Marshals Service, coordination with state police across 4 states. The mission was called Operation Daybreak. At exactly 6 a.m., the raids began. In Edina, a wealthy suburb south of Minneapolis, agents stormed a luxury home owned by a nonprofit director who claimed to run a cultural enrichment program for immigrant children. Inside, they found 8 children locked in a converted basement, medical records detailing organ compatibility tests, and a wall safe containing $780,000 in cash and falsified birth certificates. In Rochester, near the Mayo Clinic, agents hit a warehouse registered as a medical supply distributor. They found a fully equipped mobile surgical suite, refrigerated organ transport units, and communication logs coordinating shipments to Tijuana and Juarez. In St. Cloud, a so-called family counseling center was raided at dawn. Agents found children being held in small rooms with reinforced doors, medical staff conducting unauthorized blood draws, and a scheduler coordinating cross-border movements with cartel operatives in Mexico. In Duluth, near the Canadian border, ICE agents intercepted a convoy of 3 vans headed north. Inside were 11 children, falsified travel documents, and a GPS route programmed to a crossing point in northern Minnesota where border surveillance was known to be thin. Across the region, federal teams seized over $11 million in cash, 93 encrypted devices, 17 vehicles, 6 properties, hundreds of falsified identity documents, and enough medical equipment to run a covert field hospital. They arrested 42 individuals, including daycare operators, medical staff, caseworkers, and cartel coordinators. And they recovered 31 additional children. The underworld took more damage in 8 hours than it had in the last 8 years. But the operation wasn't over, because investigators were about to discover something even worse. At 2:14 p.m., inside a secure investigation room at the FBI field office, forensic accountants and data analysts were examining the financial logs seized from Osman's network. What they found was a web of corruption that reached deep into Minnesota's own law enforcement and child protective services system. 16 caseworkers at the Minnesota Department of Human Services had taken cash payments ranging from $12,000 to $85,000 each to fast-track placements, ignore red flags, and delete investigation requests from the system. 7 daycare inspectors had been paid to falsify safety reports, approve unlicensed facilities, and delay or cancel unannounced site visits. 3 family court clerks had altered custody records, sealed case files, and expedited guardianship transfers for children flagged as high risk by federal databases. And 2 county sheriffs in rural Minnesota had received monthly payments to ensure that certain foster homes and daycare facilities were never visited by patrol officers. But the deepest betrayal came from within the state government itself. Internal emails recovered from Osman's encrypted server showed that he had direct communication with a Minnesota state legislator, a representative named Marcus Lindholm, who had quietly pushed for budget cuts to daycare oversight programs, reduced penalties for unlicensed childcare operations, and blocked proposals for mandatory background checks on foster placements. Lindholm had received over $340,000 in disguised campaign contributions and consulting fees from shell companies controlled by Osman's network. This was not just a trafficking cartel. This was a parallel system of governance built inside the legitimate structures of child welfare, designed to shield exploitation from exposure. One veteran child protection officer, a woman named Officer Janet Keene, who had worked in Hennepin County for 17 years, broke down in her interview with federal agents. "I reported concerns about those daycares 3 times, she said, her voice shaking. 3 times. And every time my supervisor told me the cases were closed or reassigned. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I wasn't seeing it right. But now I know." They were protecting them from the inside. Federal investigators realized they weren't just dismantling a criminal network. They were dismantling a shadow child welfare system that had been operating for years, built on silence, complicity, and greed. And the badge, the oath, the trust, it would all have to be rebuilt from the ground up. But the scope of Operation Harvest Moon didn't end at Minnesota's borders at 7:05 a.m. The next morning, federal investigators expanded their map to include the entire upper Midwest and key points along the U.S.-Mexico border. What they uncovered was a continental pipeline. Children were recruited or taken through Osman's Minnesota network, processed through medical evaluations disguised as routine health checks, and then moved south through a network of safe houses, sham foster programs, and long-haul trucking routes operated by logistics companies controlled by cartel front organizations. The routes passed through Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and into Texas, where children were handed off to Mexican cartel operatives near El Paso, Laredo, and McAllen. From there, they disappeared into Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez, where underground medical facilities connected to the black market organ trade were waiting. Federal agents working with Mexican authorities identified at least 6 clandestine surgical facilities in Tijuana alone, all linked to the same trafficking network. These were not back alley operations. They were equipped with advanced medical technology, staffed by licensed surgeons who had been corrupted or coerced, and protected by cartel enforcers who ensured silence. Investigators found shipping manifests that had been altered to disguise the transport of medical-grade refrigeration units, organ preservation equipment, and surgical supplies labeled as veterinary materials or research lab components. They found encrypted communications discussing organ procurement quotas, client wait lists, and pricing tiers that ranged from $50,000 for a kidney to over $400,000 for a young heart. And they found a final, horrifying document buried in Osman's server files. It was titled Phase 2 Expansion Plan. The plan outlined how the network intended to scale operations across 10 additional states, targeting refugee resettlement communities in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. It included strategies for embedding operatives in state child welfare systems, recruiting corrupt officials, and building processing facilities disguised as cultural centers and religious nonprofit organizations. The goal was simple: turn the upper Midwest and the Rust Belt into a permanent, renewable pipeline for the international black market organ trade. This wasn't infiltration. This was colonization. One federal prosecutor, a man named Jacob Torrance, who had spent 15 years prosecuting organized crime, stood in front of the evidence board and spoke the truth that no one wanted to say out loud. They weren't just exploiting the system, they were redesigning it. For decades. On the morning of March 15th at 8:32 a.m., Vincent Khalil Osman was arrested in his home in the Linden Hills neighborhood of Minneapolis. He did not resist, he did not speak. He was led out in handcuffs while his neighbors watched in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the man they knew as a respected community leader and state official with the crimes now unfolding in the news. Inside his home, agents found encrypted laptops, burner phones, coded ledgers, and over $620,000 in cash, hidden in vacuum-sealed bags inside a bedroom closet. On his phone, they found text messages to cartel operatives in Mexico, medical brokers in the Middle East, and corrupt officials across Minnesota. And they found photographs of children, dozens of them, each labeled with a number, a blood type, and a status code. Osman was charged with conspiracy to commit human trafficking, child exploitation, conspiracy to commit organ trafficking under federal law, racketeering, money laundering, corruption of public office, and conspiracy to violate the civil rights of minors under federal protection. He faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. 16 other individuals, including caseworkers, daycare operators, medical staff, and county officials, were arrested and charged in the days that followed. All 67 children recovered from the network are now in federal protective custody, receiving medical care, trauma counseling, and family reunification services. But this story is not just about one network, one official, or one operation. It's about what happens when power, silence, and ambition intersect in systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable among us. It's about how corruption doesn't always announce itself with violence or chaos. Sometimes it announces itself with paperwork, with bureaucracy, with the quiet efficiency of a well-organized lie. And it's about the cost: 67 children, 17 facilities, 7 years. How many more were moved before they were found? How many more were lost before anyone noticed? This is a warning, a reminder that the systems we trust are only as strong as the people who operate them. And that organized crime doesn't just exist in the shadows. It thrives when it can infiltrate the light. If you're still watching this, tap like so more people see this story. Comment expose if you want this kind of corruption dragged into the light where it belongs. Share this so that the silence stops being an option, because power doesn't need violence when it has silence and ambition. And the only way to stop it is to refuse to stay quiet.